If you've ever played EarthBound, or as it's known in Japan, Mother 2, you definitely know who this character is, but only probably remember this one. Porky Minch is the brother of the most clever, most charming, and most troublemaking boy ever we're celebrating this glorious month of October. The younger sibling of who would later become a top contender for most detestable villain in video game history. You'd think the brother of a mother character honored with his own merchandise line would at least be important enough to have an icon on Nintendo Switch Online, but that isn't the case. Porky isn't even discussed all that much in general because, well, his pig butt of a brother hogs all the spotlight. He's only really prominent in the prologue, as a party member who actually contributes to battles, unlike Porky, even if it's mostly dealing just 1 point of damage to enemies without a smash attack. His chanting a magic spell doesn't do anything special that we know of, but hey, it's the thought that counts. Upon escorting him back home, he'll sadly hole up in his bedroom for the rest of the game, with just a few new lines of dialogue if you drop by for a visit at various points throughout the adventure. If you want to actually get Porky out of the house from here and have him see the sunrise with Ness, I recommend installing EarthBound mod menu by ShrineFox. You know, now that I think about it, it's not all that common for a Nintendo antagonist to have a brother. The big bad Bowser technically has a younger twin in the Lost Levels, aka the real Super Mario Bros. 2, called Blue Bowser, but that fact sadly seems to have been retconned in any material released after Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, where he's instead referred to simply as a type of fake Bowser, the ones who guard the castles in every world but 8. The Koopalings were also revised to have no familial relation to the Koopa King, following the debut of Bowser Jr. in Super Mario Sunshine. However, despite Bowser no longer being their father, the Koopalings are still all a gang of brothers and sister, according to the official New Super Mario Bros. U website. Wario and Waluigi have been stated to be related a few times, but various sources now, including the Mario and Sonic series, may it rest in peace, outright denies their sibling status. So besides the Koopalings, the only other notable group of ne'er-do-well brothers I can think of is the Gorman trio from The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, particularly the youngest and oldest, as these two personally sabotage their rivals' deliveries to become the only dairy vendors, then price gouge their own watered-down milk, among other nefarious actions like encouraging Link to steal a horse from the competing ranch next door. Porky Minch is like the middle Gorman brother, who doesn't engage in the notorious behavior of his villainous family. Despite growing up under the same roof, Porky didn't wind up evil at all. Unlike our rotund, pig-like, Cartman-esque, one-strap overalls-wearing frenemy, Porky is a buoyant, bowl-cut boy boasting a P for Picky t-shirt on his paper clay model, which automatically qualifies him for least favorite character of Dupes and
Ulillillia.
But it's an M for Minch on his in-game sprite, which also appears on official Hobonichi Mother Project merch. Like his brother though, Porky's bangs go over his eyes, so I can't say for certain whether or not he even has them. Of the little interaction and dialogue we get from Porky, he's a pretty responsible, mild-mannered kid compared to his big bro, and he seems humble as he's willing to admit that Ness is far cooler than he is. The character's creator, Shigesato Itoi, has gone on record saying that Porky probably just became the way he did because his parents were so bad. He describes the mother Lardna and her husband Aloysius Minch as being pretty terrible, with the latter especially having a really horrible feel to him. Aloysius relies on physical violence to try and correct their behavior, first hinted at by Porky fearing he'll get spanked 100 times if he didn't bring Porky home in time. Then later confirmed when they do get punished for arriving late and he complains about his butt hurting. Their mother and father flagrantly insult Porky throughout the story, and don't even care to look for him when he eventually goes missing. At the end of the game, Lardna engages in infidelity, and Mr. Minch spends all of his time at a bar 3 towns over because the toxic couple is irresponsible and entirely self-centered. They are neglectful and do not care about the well-being of their oldest unless it benefits them, like when Porky gets rich by becoming the partner of Forsyth's mayor Monotoli, while he's mesmerized by the evil Mani Mani. As the firstborn son, I'm sure Porky gets the brunt of their abuse, as there's more of an expectation for him to act a certain way. There's an innate pressure for him to succeed, and when he doesn't, his own parents essentially disown him. Hinawa of Mother 3 loved her children deeply and even coddled the more sensitive twin, Lucas, a bit too much. Lardna seems to be the antithesis of that, as a loveless mother now too distracted by Mr. Pretty Man to keep tabs on her own son. Lardna seems like the type who's only present in his life to scold him, so perhaps Porky acts out in an attempt to receive the attention he's sorely lacking, even if it's negative. I speculate that Porky does bad things to get his mother to notice him, and to try and earn his morally corrupt father's praise. As a naive child, Porky couldn't have realized he was trying to satisfy sick people who can never be sated, so he continued his effort to appease them throughout his formative years, and I think that allowed him to grow up with a twisted worldview about what he thinks is the true nature of human beings. We know that Porky's problematic upbringing was largely responsible for all the suffering he'd cause later. You could argue that the evil power of the game's main antagonist affected Porky, whether directly or through the Mani Mani statue, and ensured his dark descent. But I believe there was already a blackness forming in his heart that made him especially receptive to that influence. It begs the question, does Pokey possess that same potential that turned Porky into the universal cosmic destroyer's second hand? Again, as the baby brother, Pokey may have had it a bit easier in terms of expectations. However, I'm willing to wager that things weren't much better for him. I personally have one full brother, Reeve. The two of us, as adults, can be considered opposites when it comes to our overall demeanor, and even little things like how we wind down for the day. We are very much different people, but because Reeve was raised with me and experienced a lot of what I was exposed to as an adolescent, I sometimes feel as if he is the only one who can ever truly understand the specific anxieties I sit with today. We were both diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder in our teen years, which is a mental illness often misunderstood by the general public that can run in families. But, according to the International OCD Foundation, researchers believe that it is a combination of genes and environmental factors that play a role in its development. I've been told by therapists and my nurse practitioner that those like me with a predisposition to OCD could hypothetically live their lives with the illness lying dormant. However, a traumatic childhood experience can awaken symptoms in the brain, and that may help explain why my brother and I have lived with it for so long. Both our mother and father's sides of the family have a history of OCD, so we naturally inherited those genes, but somewhere along the way, the metaphorical dark dragon was awakened, bringing with it a lovely deluge of debilitating intrusive thoughts. Applying my real-world experience to this virtual space, imagine the psychological ailments and probable mental disorders both Lardna and Aloysius possess being passed on to their offspring. Both Picky and Porky may be predisposed to certain behaviors their parents demonstrate, but if, say, their parents turned over a new leaf after Porky was born, and the boys were raised in a healthier environment, perhaps those inborn tendencies would never surface. If the brothers had two positive role models who taught them the difference between right and wrong by showing rather than telling, maybe Porky could have tagged along and helped Ness even if he wasn't one of the chosen ones. Etoy is not of the mindset that people are born with inherent evil in their hearts. He argues that it has to come from somewhere. And even if the potential to be evil is in large part hereditary, I agree that a child very probably doesn't come out of the womb cursed to become a mass murderer. So much of who we are is determined by our family tree and the state of our upbringing, but we can all work to heal and choose to be good people in spite of that. I find myself somewhat frequently looking back at my high school years with contempt for the kind of person I was then. I was used to dealing with all sorts of bullies in my life up until that point, but middle school had been especially rough. I'd go to school most days in fear of being laughed at, shamed, or even threatened. So when I became a freshman, I decided I had had enough. That was the first time I remember putting on a social mask to hide the real person underneath. I've always been a shy, goofy, video game-loving guy with a good heart, But in that window of time, I stopped engaging with what I loved and changed my outward personality for the worse in an effort to avoid being seen as an easy target. It wasn't until my anxiety and depression sunk to new levels that I stopped the abrasiveness and started showing compassion again, because I knew what it was like to be at your lowest point emotionally. I didn't want anyone else to feel the way I did, potentially because of something I said to trigger them, and that centered my moral compass again. If I didn't know what it was like to hit rock bottom myself, though, would I show empathy the way I do now, or would I still be a bitter person reflecting the negativity of those around me? I'd like to apply this kind of thinking to Pokey. We of course don't know how this kid's teen years will pan out, but if we assume that he stays wary of his parents and has an otherwise normal school/social life, then I think he can find the path to becoming a decently well-adjusted adult, who just might need some therapy sessions to help manage his higher-than-average stress levels and work through a troubled past. That last part could very well just be me putting myself and others I've observed who can relate into this character, but hey, all I can do is speak from the heart and speculate based on what I know. So if I were a fortune-teller hint man, my vision for Porky Minch as an adult is your typical 9-to-5 businessman who likely leaves his hometown of Onett for the big city, in part to separate himself from his parents, but also to break free of this small world inside of his bedroom he never leaves after the prologue to broaden his horizons. It'd be kind of cute to imagine a romance between him and Ness's sister, Tracy, but I suspect he'll live the life of a bachelor for a while, until meeting a nice Forsythian to settle down with. Oh, and he probably starts a garage band with a few of his work buddies. I can see Pokey visiting his estranged parents for an annual awkward Thanksgiving at least, where he sneakily slips away to hang out with Ness next door and reminisce about Porky. Some fans have noticed the visual similarities between Pokey and the character Bateau from Mother 3, but because the exact time span between these games is unclear, if you're the type who likes to speculate, Bateau could be seen as either Pokey himself, assigned a new fabricated role like all of the other memory-wiped inhabitants of the Nowhere Islands, or simply a descendant. What do you think? Did Pokey survive the end of the world, board the white ship, and become Bateau the pigeon postmaster? Or do they just happen to look similar and there's no relation at all? Despite being a fairly minor character in the grand scheme of things, Pokey does have the honor of speaking the final line in the game he does unequivocally appear in, concerning his brother's whereabouts when bringing over a letter written by Porky addressed to Ness. In response to having read it out loud, he says, "I wonder where he is," and then an Irish shot closes out the scene with an iconic "The End," teasing the sequel game, which will answer that question and raise many new ones. This is it for Pokey's arc though, as Porky doesn't seem to have an unusual obsession with his brother like he does with his mother and Ness. Pokey is alluded to in a line dropped by one of several uncanny robot waitresses modeled after Lardna though. She declares that there's nothing wrong with being picky. That line makes me think that Pokey's namesake could come from the phrase picky eater, but according to Legends of Localization Book 2, EarthBound by Clyde Mandelin, his name is very close to Piggy in Japanese. However, it's unclear if this was Itoi's original intention. Is he a picky piggy because he's rather thin for a minch? Rather than Aloysius, the father's name in Japanese is Anburami, a word that refers to blubber or fatty meat. Lardna's name is the same in both languages and is of course derived from lard, which is most often pork fat, while minch itself comes from the Japanese word for mincemeat. Then obviously there's Porky, which was mistranslated as Pokey in the English localization. Funnily enough though, Pokey and Pokey still go together. Clyde Mandelin pointed out that Pokey's contradictory name to the Minch's theme seems to point to the fact that he's not much like the rest of his family, supporting my idea that Pokey won't become his greedy parents. I want to believe that he'll leave the proverbial pig pen after the events of EarthBound and go his own way, finally free of the Minch family curse. Thank you all for watching this unexpectedly personal month of Porky episode. Join me next time for the continued celebration dedicated to the greatest person ever. Right next to my patrons of the PK Love tier, Brian and Susan, Captain Harlock, Dat Barry, Jennifer, Kathleen, Katie, Pangake, and Janssen.